I look back and see 1965 as a very important year. One of my favorite things at Marvel that happened in '65 was Wally Wood had left Mad Magazine, and he came over to Marvel and did like exactly a year from November of '64 to November of '65, and really contributed a lot to Daredevil and worked on Avengers and some other books. But that was also the year that for the first time Marvel surpassed Brand X, I'll leave nameless, for the first time in history, and Marvel has been #1 in sales ever since.
Naturally.
It's funny, this is an example though of what I'm pointing out is the difference between what I would refer to as the Goodman era, the timely Atlas Goodman era, and when you became more of the driving force, the creative force of the company.
Well, obviously, there's no stopping me. But, you know, I got to tell you a funny thing about the competition. I wrote these columns, Stan's Soapbox, and I wrote something called Bullpen Bulletins Page. I like to write and stay in contact with the fans. And I would refer to National Comics, because they were in DC. I referred to them as Brand X. Instead of Brand X, I spelled it ECHH. And I kind of got a kick out of that. But then, one day, just for fun, I decided to do a humor magazine, and we called it Not Brand X. And we had the craziest stories in the world, and I don't know why I mentioned that, so strike that one. Oh, I know what I wanted to tell you. One more thing. When we knew we were on a roll, we were called Atlas Comics at the time, and I said, that's not a good enough name for us. We're not doing the same books we did before. We have these great superheroes. We're starting to outsell National Comics. Let's change our name. And I talked Martin, our publisher, into changing our name to Marvel Comics. The very first comic book he ever published was called Marvel Mystery Comics with the Human Torch and Submariner. So we called ourselves Marvel, and that was a great name because I could treat it like an advertising campaign. I could have sayings like, make mine Marvel, Marvel marches on, welcome to the Marvel age of comics, and so forth. Well, National Comics decided if we changed our name, they're going to change theirs. I understand they hired some organization that comes up with names to help them. They pay them a lot of money. And what did they come up with? We have Marvel Comics. They came up with DC. I mean, could you think of a worse name than D? Anything would have been better. But that's it. So it wasn't that our books were so good that we outsold them. It's just that they were so dumb at that time. I'm only kidding. They're all friends of mine. I love them, although they probably won't be friends anymore after that.
There was also, I like he started some fan clubs. He had the Mary Marvel Marching Society, and that was followed up in 1969 with the Marvel Mania, and which I know that was licensed out, but it was such a good time period. There was some wonderful work done there by all the top Marvel artists, and then Foom after that in the early 70s. Another thing, a lot of people you may forget, there was, I want to connect this again to the culture of the time, in the late 60s and early 70s. Marvel actually had an event at Madison Square Garden. You remember that?
Event in Madison Square Garden.
Marvel Comics took over Madison Square Garden, and I think there was some of the artists performed the music. I think Herb Trimp and
oh no, that was Carnegie.
Oh, Carnegie Hall. Sorry.
Would you believe I had a day in Carnegie Hall? Some producer rented the hall for one day. And I forget that it's something like a night with Stan Lee and Marvel Comics, something like that. And it was a crazy night. And I got up there on stage, and Roy Thomas was there, and Herb Trimpe, and whatever guys could play music, and who's the fellow who wrote, oh damn it, Thomas Wolfe was there. I was so proud he went there and made a speech at us. And I don't even remember it clearly, but I walked outside of the theater one day, and I saw a billboard out front with my name and the name Marvel tonight, and I thought, wow, it was impossible that we'd be at Carnegie Hall. So you've heard the joke, of course. A guy stops somebody in the street, and he says, "Excuse me, how do I get to Carnegie Hall?" And the guy says, "Practice, practice." Anyway, so see, they're all musicians and they practice. I'm leaving.
So along these lines, they're just kind of like milestones, you know, a growing momentum to what was becoming this phenomenon of Marvel. Are there any other things you think, when you look back, you know, milestones that you see or most fondly through your career, anytime through your career?
Well, the biggest milestone with me was when I stopped becoming a writer and they made me the publisher, and I started traveling around the world lecturing about Marvel. And that was fun. Oh man, did I love that. I went to Italy, I went to England, France, Germany, Japan, and trying to get them to read Marvel and think Marvel, and I became a world traveler. So that was, unfortunately though, I had to stop writing the stories then. I was lucky, I turned over the editorship to Roy Thomas, who did a great job. And then after him, there were so many editors, nobody could keep track of them. There was Mark Wolfman and, wait a minute,
Shooter.
And Len Wein, and Jerry
Conway?
Yeah, Jerry Conway. And on, Archie Goodwin. But I always stayed in touch, and I would always write an occasional story just to keep my hand in it. And that brings us up to the present. What are we going to talk about?
Pretty much, but we did a panel together not too long ago in Los Angeles, and...
You vowed you'd never do another one with me.
I never said such a thing. If they call, I'm here.
All right.
But we started talking about the subject matters of your writing, and Silver Surfer, you like Silver Surfer, and he got to pontificate in the voice of the Silver Surfer in almost biblical language. The same thing with Thor. But we were talking about the subject matter of the stories, and you said that Prejudice was one that you thought you were proud of, that you wrote on a bit.
Well, I tried to write the kind of stories, especially with the X-Men, to show that we shouldn't hate or even dislike people who are different. Everybody is different. And there seems to be some trait in human nature that makes a lot of people dislike anybody who has a different religion, a different color, is from a different country. When I was a kid, we lived in a little street in the Bronx somewhere, and the kids across the street, our guys didn't like them because they were the kids across the street. They're no good, they're not us. And I sometimes feel if everybody loved everybody, there would still be people, the blondes would hate the redheads, and the tall guys would hate the short guys, and the fat guys would hate the... There seems to be something that makes people hate people who are different. And in some way, I'm not trying to change mankind with a comic book, but wherever I could, if I could get the idea in our stories that just because people are different, it doesn't mean they're not as good or better than you are. So we tried that with the X-Men, with the Silver Surfer, and I tried to inject that subtly in a lot of other stories.
I'm not sure.